It's 1990 and Dwayne Johnson is playing football for the University of Miami, but not for long as an injury suffered during practice sidelines him for the season. Meanwhile, Atta and Rocky deal with empty nest syndrome and have very different ways of coping. We're talking Young Rock Season 1, Episode 4 on Pro Wrestling Repackaged. Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining us again. My name is Chris.
And my name is Tessa.
And this is Pro Wrestling Repackaged, where the squared circle meets the small screen. Since there was no new episode of Young Rock last week, we took the opportunity to do a bonus episode about The Rock's appearance on That 70s Show, so definitely check that out if you haven't given that a listen. It was definitely a good time, but finally, Young Rock has come back, and this week, we're discussing Season 1, Episode 4 of Young Rock, Check Your Head. Before we dive in, there was a recent interview with some of the main cast members that we wanted to just quickly chat about. Yahoo Entertainment did an interview with all three Young Rocks, Adrian Grew, Bradley Constant, and Uli Latukefu. I thought some of the most interesting things that came out of this interview were food-related. But first, one of the big takeaways from this interview is that all three Young Rocks, they didn't really get to spend much time with each other on set because they all film in different time periods, so they're all kind of working at different stages of the production. But they did get together a lot, apparently, to hang out, and Adrian's mom cooks everyone food, and apparently Bradley makes a good pie, which is very
fitting.
Very Rock appropriate, definitely. And they talked a little bit about how they haven't had the chance to meet The Rock in person yet. It's only been over Zoom so far. But if they were given the opportunity to meet The Rock in the future, they were each asked, what they would like to do with him. And Uli said that he wants to train with The Rock, which is very fitting. Bradley, however, this was our main reason for wanting to talk about this
Bradley is
interview.
Something else.
Bradley Constant wants to have a waffle eating contest with The Rock. Apparently, waffles, he's very passionate about waffles.
So's The Rock.
So is The Rock. Very passionate about waffles and waffle himself. But Bradley Constant has dubbed himself the King of Waffles because he has been having what he calls Waffle Saturdays since he was in 6th grade. So
he thinks he could take The Rock, but The Rock's quite a bit older. He's probably been eating waffles a bit longer.
Yeah. I mean, Bradley does mention the fact that The Rock is older and has more waffle eating experience, but Bradley is very confident in his waffle eating abilities. He's the king of waffles.
You got to respect that.
I would buy this on an iPay-per-view stream.
They could even do a Zoom waffle eating contest if they really wanted to. I think the challenge has been set.
This would be great content for Peacock.
Yeah.
I'd be more interested in watching this than just about anything else on there aside from Young Rock, but
I hope The Rock has seen that.
I hope so. I'm sure he has, and I'm sure he's training, and he's in the gym, clanging and banging, and then taking a big bite of waffles. I'm sure.
It's that Saturday, Sunday cheat meal.
Yeah. Waffle Saturdays. So what Adrian would do, given a chance to meet The Rock, is give him a 5-minute hug, which I would like to see that happen right after the waffle eating contest with The Rock just so full from these waffles and Adrian just giving him a big, tight 5-minute hug.
Now, I'm about the same size as Adrian. So I'm just imagining if I were him and I was hugging The Rock for 5 minutes, he would probably kill me.
Yeah, Adrian did mention trying not to get crushed,
every single bone.
His entire bone structure crushed. But I thought that was a nice little interview and some fun little tidbits from there. But it's nice to see all three Young Rocks together, just kind of talking about their experience working on this show and portraying the same guy at three very different periods of his life. So if you haven't seen that, definitely check that interview out from Yahoo Entertainment. And with that, it is now time for this week's edition of The Rock Says.
The Rock says, The Rock says.
What's The Rock saying?
So Tessa, why don't you kick it off for us this week?
Well, I usually pick a funny quote because there's usually just so many hilarious lines. But this time I went with this one from when The Rock is talking about his bout with depression, where he says, asking for help isn't a weakness. Asking for help is actually our superpower. I just think it's really important for someone like The Rock, who's this manly man, the epitome of a macho man, come out and say, hey, you're not alone. Depression is very real, and it's something that even I have dealt with.
Yes, The Rock says mental health awareness, self-care, ask for help. It's okay. We all go through it. This is a really big theme of this episode. It's very important. It's probably the most poignant theme that they have touched on so far in this show, and I thought that they did a really good job with it. I, however, went with the low-hanging fruit of a funny quote. And there's a lot of them in this episode. Most of them are Rocky Johnson.
As usual.
But Uli got some really great stuff in this episode. But my favorite part, this 5 seconds alone would have sold me on the entire series had it been the very first thing I saw. Turtleneck, fanny pack, chain, Dwayne. He even does the sniffs the air. And if you presented this to me and said, hey, this is going to be a show, I'm in, I'm watching it, I'm doing the podcast about it. This alone would have sold me.
You know, given how much the turtleneck fanny pack chain picture is seen and talked about all the time, The Rock doesn't shut up about it himself. I'm really surprised that wasn't actually part of like the initial trailer and previews of the show.
Right. Well, that's the funny thing about this is that it's kind of one of those things like, when there's a new comic book movie or TV series coming out, some of the conversation and speculation is always, oh, I wonder if they're going to show this. I wonder if they're going to, I wonder if he's going to wear this costume or they're going to do this or this character. For The Rock, that kind of equivalent is, I wonder if we'll see the turtleneck and the fanny pack.
And the original image, it's not even from 1990. It's from 1995.
Right. Right. They're kind of playing fast and loose with some of that stuff in terms of what things happened when, where they happened, who they happened with, because it's a scripted show. Right. It's a fictional take on real life events. I do not blame them for wanting to get that image of him in that getup in the first season. Because again, I see that and I'm like, I am sold on this show, and I was already sold on the show.
They said, we might not get a season 2. We might not get to talk about 1995. Let's just do it now.
Sure. I mean, you always, you worry that you're not going to get a season 2 when you're doing your first season. And so you want to do as much as you can, put enough out there that people really want and clamor for that season 2, but also not give too much away. I guarantee if there are future seasons of the show, we will see that very outfit again. I mean, it's not like The Rock only wore that in real life once. You got to imagine he thought he was so hot in that. He thought he was hot stuff. You got to imagine that he's wearing that every chance he gets.
For 5 years?
Oh, come on. He's that type of guy. I mean, The Rock essentially wears the same thing all the time now.
I guess that's
it's like a cutoff tank top and track pants. I mean, that's my mental image of The Rock, and him just wearing that every day. But no, I firmly believe that we will see that, that's kind of his unofficial Young Rock uniform.
And he's recreated it like recently in the past few years.
Right. I mean, you got to embrace that. If you're The Rock, that's the great thing about this show in general, is that he just has such a sense of humor about himself. And I just think that's part of what makes this show so fun.
I think that's part of just The Rock's charm.
Yeah.
Period.
For sure. So we're talking about Young Rock Season 1, Episode 4, Check Your Head, directed by Jeffrey Walker, written by Patrick Kang and Michael Levin. Tessa, why don't you give us a little summary of what happened this episode?
Sure. So Dwayne is in his freshman year of college. He's playing football at the University of Miami, where he's surrounded by all these celebrities on the sideline. At first, we see him, he's doing great in practices, but one day he's injured by a teammate, which means he can't play for the rest of the season. And this happens right before their first game against Brigham Young University. So now technically he's still part of the team. He can go to meetings, he can go to the games, but without being able to actually play football, he kind of loses his purpose. He becomes depressed, and he eventually just sort of leaves school and stays on his parents' couch watching TV, like all through winter break.
Relatable.
Until his dad, kind of has this little motivating talk with him. But also in this episode, we see Rocky and Atta suffering from empty nest syndrome, where they deal with it in very different ways. You have Ada, who can't help but worry about her son. She's very stressed, while Rocky just wants to swim with the dolphins. At the same time, The Rock's grandmother, Leah, is homeless, having been deported and now living in Samoa. But we assume we'll get more of that story in some of the 80s episodes.
Yeah, she looked like she had really been through it, and I
Yeah.
felt so bad. So I am definitely very curious to see that story play out in future episodes. But
He's leaving us hanging
yeah,
with that
yeah,
one.
definitely a cliffhanger for last week's episode at the beginning of this week's episode.
Yeah.
Which it is definitely one way to go about it. But overall thoughts from this episode, I would say, in my opinion, I thought this was among the strongest episodes yet, maybe the strongest. I think the fact that we spent the least amount of time with 90s Dwayne in the pilot really made me curious to see more of him. And I know that you said this was your most anticipated time period to see portrayed.
Yeah, I really like the 90s, but I was kind of concerned that the 1990 episodes wouldn't really click with me because I figured they'd primarily be about football, which I know absolutely nothing about.
Right.
But I think this episode was really strong. I think it did a great job of handling mental health issues like depression. But it also manages to, because this is a sitcom, add that humor that we're all looking for.
I feel the same way. I know nothing about football. I am not a sports fan in general, but a weird thing about me is that I love sports movies, especially more like kind of like family sports movies or kids sports movies. I'm like a sucker for the Mighty Ducks and Rookie of the Year, those type of things, even like a Coach Carter. So the football aspect definitely did not turn me off of this time period. In fact, I really just wanted to see how they're going to portray all that and kind of the cast of characters that we would get parallel to the wrestling cast of characters that we get mostly in the 82 episodes, but also a little bit in 87. So I was very intrigued, but this episode in a lot of ways almost felt like a whole other show.
Right.
Because we're after 3 episodes, we're really stepping into this time period and being able to stretch our legs for the first time. We only spent a few minutes, like I said, in the pilot in the 90s and at the University of Miami. So really, this is kind of untapped territory so far for the show. And we kind of settled in with 87 and 82, and we got to know that version of Dwayne, and getting to know this version of Dwayne and kind of feeling how this era has its own vibe and feel. I was really a fan of Uli Latukefu's performance in this episode. I think he really had a chance to shine finally on the show, and he delivered big time. I think it would have been so easy for him to be overshadowed by some of the other big personalities surrounding him, and we'll talk about those personalities a little bit later, but how he manages to really embody Dwayne Johnson at this age in such a believable way, he jumps off the screen, and I think that he knocked it out of the park, or scored the touchdown, if you will.
Yeah, he really feels like The Rock. I think he has the look down, the mannerisms. I think he
The
really,
physicality.
yeah. I thought he was amazing in this.
Yeah, completely agreed. I am really looking forward to seeing the next 90s episode and seeing more of it, but I really enjoyed seeing him portray Dwayne's struggle with this injury and how dealing with that really gave him this resilience that it seems like The Rock has maintained ever since, and it has only grown. And, you know, as we know, football continues to be a big part of The Rock's life. You know, he never went pro, but he's done a lot of football-related things in his life. He's done a football movie, Gridiron Gang. He did a football TV series, Ballers, which is kind of almost like this alternate timeline in which he does get signed to the NFL coming out of the University of Miami. And as we know, The Rock now owns the XFL. So football is something that The Rock has kind of kept close to him, even though his career went in a wildly different direction and maybe unexpected for him at the time. But football is still a big part of his life. So it must be very rewarding for him to get to relive moments like this in his life where he was so low.
Right.
But look at everything that has come out of it and how he has been able to kind of have this like fantasy camp like experience living out his other dreams, his other wild dreams that he never got to fulfill in real life.
Right. Yeah. Not many people can say, not many people would be able to do that. We could all be so lucky to be Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and get to just live out everything we want to do.
And potentially run for president.
President.
No Randall again in this episode.
I am tired of this Randall erasure. Where is he? Is he not allowed to talk about sports? Is that what the problem is? Can you imagine him sitting there talking about football with The Rock? I can't. It'd be like me talking about football with The Rock.
Very, very sad. No Randall again. That's 2 episodes. We really, really do miss him. But Kenny Smith, who is a retired basketball player and current sports commentator, he's a host for Inside the NBA. He is interviewing The Rock about sports-related things, and I guess a better fit.
He would be the expert.
The thing that really struck me about this segment here, other than the fact that there was no Randall, is this very odd product placement for Beyond Protein. Now, we know Beyond Protein in 2021 as Beyond Meat, and we know them very well because
we just had a Beyond Burger.
Yeah, we eat vegan, and this product placement here, first of all, Beyonde, the burger person mascot.
I love him.
Love Beyonde.
He says, "Where's the beef? On the cow, where it belongs." Big fan.
That takes us to 1990 with College Dwayne in Miami, Florida, at the University of Miami. And at this point, Dwayne Johnson is a hot prospect in football, and he just all around thinks he's hot stuff during this time period. You know, we see so much of his swagger and his eventual wrestling persona come out in the early parts of this episode. You know, The Rock says quote when he's getting dressed and putting on that fanny pack and the chain and sniffs the air. So much of that element of who he would eventually become and that persona that he would eventually just turn that dial up to 11. We see that here, and even going as far as doing the pose at Uncle Luke's party, the pose with the outfit. Just, for me, another show-selling scene.
Yeah, I think we're definitely getting hints of who The Rock will be in just 8 years. You know, we're seeing that cocky, arrogant, he really thinks he's something.
The quote to the 2 girls at the party is, "I'm 18, but I make love like I'm 30. And then he does this embarrassing dance that I would pay any amount of money to see the real Rock do.
God, he's so embarrassing.
He really is. And so much of this show is The Rock being like, hey, I was really embarrassing in 1982. I was really embarrassing in 1987. I was really embarrassing in 1990.
When is he
Look
not
at me be embarrassing. I also just want to mention right off the top that it's pretty wild that we get portrayals of people like Uncle Luke from 2 Live Crew, the rap group 2 Live Crew, and Michael Irvin, kind of an infamous figure in football. We get portrayals of them in this NBC family sitcom that's on at 8 o'clock. The people who have shown up on this show with fictional portrayals, if you just read the list, it's just kind of surreal.
There's really something for everybody.
Truly. And it's one of those things like, hey, yeah, you see the guy who played Uncle Luke from 2 Live Crew on Young Rock. Wait, what?
It just goes to show this show still doesn't feel real.
Yes, it feels like someone's wild fever dream that The Rock made happen.
Which is very on brand for like 2020, 2021.
Yeah. But during this time period, Dwayne is hot stuff, but there's also a lot of emphasis on the kind of expectations that everyone has on Dwayne and that he also has on himself. And even after he gets injured later on, the expectations are just on him to rehab hard and come back next year even stronger. And that type of pressure, when we saw in the pilot, when he walked in and his reputation preceded him because Rocky Johnson was bragging about him and playing things up and talking about the Wheaties box. And he just kind of had to, again, he had to go back to the concept of working the gimmick. And we see him still very much doing that here and kind of figuring out the gimmick that he's working and figuring out who he is when he's working this gimmick. And the amount of pressure on him at this point for it to all come crashing down later on when he gets injured, that's got to be so crushing because, a lot of us know what it's like. I'm sure many people know what it's like to have that amount of pressure on them in any given situation and the kind of pressure that you put on yourself being the biggest pressure. But when you have a father like Rocky Johnson and when you have a family like The Rock does, and when you're on a team like the Miami Hurricanes at this point, which had a very stacked roster and people who would go on to be big stars in football, the expectations are weighing heavy on Dwayne at this point, but he's cool under the pressure so far.
Everyone has this idea of who he is or who he should be, so he just kind of has to fake it. Whether or not he feels that way in his own mind, he's, sitting there saying, I got big expectations for myself. I'm going to move the crowd.
Yeah.
He's 18.
And he already has stardom.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just that he wants to play football. He loves the game. He wants to play football. He wants to be a standout like his father.
He doesn't want to just be another person on the team.
No, he wants to be a trailblazer.
And it doesn't help that his dad's going around and telling everybody, still, we see it in this episode too, going around, my son, he's playing for the Miami Hurricanes.
Getting people tickets, giving out little flags.
Right. He's wearing a Miami University of Miami shirt everywhere he goes.
But a big part of that too is Rocky, as we mentioned in a past episode, at this point in his life, he's driving a truck. He is beyond wrestling at this point. Mm-hmm. He's on the downslope. That pride that he has in his son, it's so big and it's so loud. And at this point, he's really living vicariously through Dwayne.
For sure. For sure. Because at this point, wrestling has kind of left him behind.
Yeah. He's old news.
Yeah.
He's driving this truck and living vicariously through his son. And, Dwayne, to some degree, has to realize that and has to realize that he can't let his parents down. He has to live up to these expectations. And he's so eager to do that he's buying them a new TV. He's promising them a 3-bedroom ranch house in a couple of years. And this was one of my favorite scenes from this episode. And my favorite moment of the entire show thus far is Rocky Johnson. When they get the new TV, Rocky Johnson picks up their old TV and goes, I'll throw this old small bitch TV in the trash. he's just going to throw the TV out.
I can't get over Joseph Lee Anderson, I feel like, is the breakout star of this show.
Joseph Lee Anderson is incredible.
He's so good at it.
We've been saying this every week, but wow, he is so good. And Stacey Leilua is right there with him. But Joseph Lee Anderson gets to have these fun lines. He just gets to have a great time on this show.
Yeah, whereas Ada, we see her, she kind of has more serious stuff going on.
Well, she's the glue.
Right. Not that Rocky isn't dealing with serious stuff, but he is able to make it funny.
He's working the gimmick.
Right.
He's dealing with it in his own way. And that's a big part of what this episode is about and how they both deal with this empty nest syndrome of Dwayne's off at the University of Miami playing football, so they moved to Florida. What was it, Tampa they moved to?
Tampa, yeah.
They moved to Tampa, I guess the separation anxiety would have been too hard to stay in Bethlehem. They sold their business. Is that right?
I believe so, yeah.
And they're dealing with empty nest syndrome in very different ways. Ata is very concerned that someone will steal Dwayne's ATM PIN number. Little minute details like that are totally, that's a mom,
Yeah.
Whereas Rocky, he just wants to have a good time. He's breaking out the entertainment coupon book. I've never seen someone so excited about the idea of getting 50% off to swim with dolphins.
He is so into it. I want nothing more for him than to be able to swim with those dolphins.
Yes, and that's the thing. We can't just allude to it. We need to see it.
Yes.
We need the scene of him swimming with the dolphins because I've never seen anyone just so overjoyed at just the very idea. Swimming with dolphins and 50% off. But he loved that coupon book.
I think that's relatable. I mean, they've always been struggling with money. So when you get that coupon book, like when you get the sale paper in the mail, that's exciting.
It's just such a sweet kind of scene for, knowing that he's got to be struggling too. And he's putting on this brave face for his family. And he's driving the truck, but he's trying to make the best of things. But how excited he gets about these little things. It's a very sweet scene between Ata and Rocky.
In the 1987 episode, we have Ata with her little joy being the coffee creamer. For Rocky, it's his entertainment coupon book.
But mostly the dolphins.
Love
the dolphins. Man, if Dwayne ever played for the Miami Dolphins,
he would have lost it.
So a big part of this episode is the colorful cast of characters that we get here in 1990, all kind of surrounding the University of Miami. And we mentioned a few of them earlier, but the parallel here to the wrestling characters in 1982 was not lost on me. It's Dwayne Johnson being surrounded by all these very charismatic and kind of eccentric figures. And how he contextualizes himself in the midst of a big group of wrestlers or a big group of football stars or rap stars or, eccentric coaches, things like that. I feel like that says so much about who Dwayne Johnson eventually became as The Rock, how he kind of took elements of a lot of these people and turned that into a wrestling character.
Well, even in this episode, you see the coach, he says, let's see if you're a hard ass or a candy ass.
Yes, which obviously influenced The Rock's liberal use of the phrase candy ass in the future. Of course, Coach Ed Orgeron, portrayed by Emmett Skilton, and also appearing as himself at the end of the episode, which was a very nice moment we'll talk about. But Coach Ed, or Coach O, as The Rock refers to him, he's a retired football player and still a college football coach. He's coached many teams, including the University of Miami from 1988 to 1992. He also appeared as himself in the 2009 football movie The Blind Side, as the head coach for Mississippi, another football movie. I've seen that one, I think, a couple of times.
Is that the Sandra Bullock movie?
Yes, that is the Sandra Bullock movie, yes. So this is not his first go-around with appearing in something as himself, but Emmett Skilton portraying Coach O, and he has this very distinctive accent, I believe a Cajun accent.
Yeah.
And he
very much the water boy like.
You mentioned that while we were watching. It gave you a water boy vibe, but he likes to chew his coffee grounds, and he's just got a very distinctive personality, which I appreciate because, obviously this is based on a real person, but, a lot of times the football coach is just the hard ass and just mean and yelling, and this guy, he has some flavor to him, a Cajun flavor, if you will, that I did appreciate while we were watching this episode.
Yeah, he definitely has a big personality, so you could see how he would influence The Rock in the future.
One of The Rock's teammates that we see portrayed is Russell Maryland, and he's portrayed by Wavy Jones, who, by the way, looked familiar as I was watching. Then I looked him up and I realized, oh yeah, he played the Notorious B.I.G. in a TV show called Unsolved, The Murders of Tupac and the Notorious B.I.G., which is a great kind of mini-series if anyone's interested in that. But yeah, Wavy Jones portraying Russell Maryland here, who is a retired football player, obviously one of Dwayne's former teammates for the University of Miami. We also see Michael Irvin, portrayed by Rich Morrow. Now, I have heard the name Michael Irvin, and I'm not a football fan. I know maybe a handful of football players from this era. I've heard the names, just from being alive during that time. But Michael Irvin, a retired football player and sports commentator, at that point in 1990 was playing for the Dallas Cowboys and was a University of Miami alumnus. And Michael Irvin is a bit of an infamous figure. His reputation precedes him. He's had some legal trouble and things of that nature. But Michael Irvin himself, actually, this is a fun little tidbit, was one of the co-stars of the 2005 remake of The Longest Yard, which is another football movie, and an Adam Sandler movie, an Adam Sandler football movie, as well as another Adam Sandler movie, Jack and Jill, he was also in.
So Adam Sandler must be a big fan.
And it makes sense. Adam Sandler's a fan of athletes with big personalities like John McEnroe, who was in Mr. Deeds. So,
right.
That checks out. But yeah, Michael Irvin, portrayed by Rich Morrow, and very flamboyant, wears the fur coat with no shirt under it with a big chain. So you can definitely see where The Rock got some of his, The Rock never wore a big fur coat
maybe
as The Rock.
Should've.
But the $500 shirts, that might be a nod to maybe the kind of the style of Michael Irvin and how he portrayed himself. And, he's this big football star. He's playing in the NFL, but he's still on the sidelines here at the University of Miami. And
I think it's interesting that you have these alumni coming back constantly, even though they're big stars coming to visit and see what the team is doing. It's very reminiscent of The Rock returning to wrestling and giving these shout outs to wrestling all of the time.
To my understanding, the University of Miami at this time was a pretty big deal. I may be wrong. I don't know everything about football. I don't know anything about football. But, we do see other prominent people in entertainment on the sidelines.
Right.
One being Uncle Luke, or Luther Campbell, who is the leader of the rap group Two Live Crew, being portrayed here by Lovensky Jean-Baptiste. I probably butchered that, but Uncle Luke is kind of infamous for his association with this football team,
right,
with the University of Miami Hurricanes. And I believe that there is some mention of this in the book The Rock Says.
Yes. Yeah, The Rock mentions this. Now, Uncle Luke didn't go to the University of Miami. He didn't graduate from there, but he grew up in the area. So he was a fan of the football team. And he's, as we've said, he's kind of controversial. He's, a big star. The Rock says that Luther naturally dug the cockiness of the Miami football team, and to show his appreciation, he'd offer prize money for certain accomplishments. For example, when we played Florida State, Luther would let it be known that there was a bounty on the head of Charlie Ward, the Seminoles' Heisman Trophy-winning quarterback. The player who hit Charlie the hardest would get a reward, usually $500. Sometimes there was cash for sacking the quarterback or for making a great catch. It differed each week, but you could always look forward to Luke's pot until the NCAA cracked down on him and he was tossed out of the locker room.
So we probably won't be seeing any of that on Young Rock, but very interesting, this pay-for-play system. But that kind of stakes attached to these college football games, and sure, sports betting is an institution and almost as important as sports itself, I would imagine, to a lot of sports fans. But that kind of pressure, that kind of motivation for a guy like Dwayne Johnson and a lot of those other young players, they probably thrived off of that and fed on that. So how bummed would Dwayne be to miss out?
Not to mention that, at this time, he's trying to kind of provide for his family, trying to be a big shot, buying them these TVs, whatever.
Yeah.
So $500 for taking out a quarterback, that could be very helpful.
He could have bought an even bigger TV.
Yeah, one that's even wider in the back.
and then the new TV would have been the little bitch TV. We also see a portrayal of a player named Mario Cristobal, portrayed by Joshua Hoyo Jr. Cristobal is a retired football player and current college football coach who almost became a Secret Service agent after his football career ended before changing his mind and just going with coaching. But man, he went through the whole process of trying to become a Secret Service agent. But this is the player who injured Dwayne during practice. So he plays an important role in this episode. But this kind of cast of characters with these big personalities parallel in a lot of ways to the wrestlers in the earlier episodes. And we can see a lot of where The Rock got his persona from.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting. And so much of this is just unsaid and is just left for you to kind of infer, these kind of Easter eggs for you to pick up. And I really enjoy being introduced to these different elements that shape The Rock in this way, just through these different figures in his life.
He's surrounded by a very confident group of men.
Yeah.
So it's no wonder that he would have to kind of take on that himself.
A lot of testosterone going on. Yeah.
I imagine that's the case in any football setting.
But I think the important thing to note here is that he was also for his entire life surrounded by very strong women.
That too, yes.
In his mother and his grandmother.
Of course.
So that plays a big role into, I guess, who he is just as a person.
Well, and you see that at the beginning when they're on the football field at practice. He takes that one guy out and the coach, is saying how great he is. And he says, "Thank you. Oh, you're polite as fuck."
But as we mentioned, Dwayne gets injured. Coach O makes Dwayne and Mario Cristobal face off for a rematch from a previous drill, and Cristobal tackles Dwayne so hard that he tears the ligaments in his shoulder, and Coach also swallows his coffee grounds. So Dwayne is out for the season at that point, which is crushing, and we start to see the downward spiral. But Atta, at the same time, her mother's intuition, and her worrying about Dwayne this whole time, had her already kind of knowing that something was wrong. So when they get this phone call, she already kind of felt like something was going on, something was wrong. It's that mother's intuition.
Yeah, and she's kind of annoyed at Rocky because he was kind of trying to distract her with dolphins.
Yeah. And he's, downplaying it to a degree, saying injuries are part of the game. Remember when I broke 3 ribs against Big John Studd and after the match, Andre kept tickling me? Another one of the just awesome lines that the writers give to Joseph Lee Anderson.
Just make this the Rocky Johnson show, and I think it'd still be really good.
There's a great line, an exchange between Kenny and Dwayne in 2032, where Kenny goes, "You never want to be the guy in jeans." And Dwayne goes, "Oh, it was bad, Kenny. And the jeans, they were wide." And they were. Early 90s jeans, always a sight to behold.
90s fashion is really something.
It is, yeah.
And this is pre-grunge. So
Yeah, pre-grunge, so it's still kind of the 80s.
yeah.
So it's in that awkward transition period, which is always the most interesting when it comes to just the absurd things that people find themselves wearing. So at this point, this is a little segment I like to call When Working the Gimmick Goes Wrong. It's like that old Dave Chappelle skit when keeping it real goes wrong. Because we see at this point, Dwayne, the wheels are starting to fall off, and he's still trying to work this gimmick and still trying to play it cool and act like he's not bothered, act like he's not hurting inside. But this is really coming out of him in the form of blowing off his responsibilities to the team and blowing off his schoolwork, not paying attention in class, playing his Game Boy, sitting in his dorm room playing Sega, to the point where his roommate Omar notices kind of this downward spiral that he's in and tries to help him get his head straight by going out and looking for a fight.
Is that helpful?
No. I think Omar had great intentions here, but just a horrible influence in terms of, here's the absolute wrong thing to do. Hey, you want to get your frustrations out? Let's go beat someone up.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like a very wise choice.
But as we know, Dwayne is no stranger to getting in trouble at this point, so this didn't seem too far-fetched for him.
And he's supposed to be studying. He has a 6 a.m. final.
Yeah.
But his friend's like, no, let's go out and beat people up.
Yeah. So they go to this club and they're standing in line, and Dwayne is heckled by this guy in line at the club because, oh, that guy's not on the team. I've never seen him play. And Dwayne wants to fight him, but this guy turns out to be this black belt in judo, and Dwayne just wants no part of it at that point.
I'm trying to imagine The Rock backing down from a fight. Being that size and being afraid of someone is really interesting to me.
Yeah, no, this guy definitely would be the one to strike first. At this same point, Dwayne sees Uncle Luke outside the club, and Uncle Luke totally disses Dwayne and dismisses him.
Calls him Dan.
After being so friendly with him at the party and how Dwayne was this, this hot shot, this blue chipper, and now he's trash. He's yesterday's news. He might as well not even be on the team.
Well, if you can't contribute to the team's success, how valuable are you really?
Right. And all of this is taking such a toll on him, but Dwayne is still trying to put on this brave face and just grit through it. But that winds him up depressed on his parents' couch, eating endless amounts of food and watching TV. I bet he's glad he bought them that new set at this point, But we get this great montage of all the food on the coffee table in front of the TV and the inside the fridge shots, which I think we've gotten one in every episode.
They do like their fridge shots.
At the end of the season, there could be a great 2-minute montage of all the inside the fridge shots from this show. But it's just really sad to see someone spiral like that, but the way he does it here is so relatable to so many people, I'm sure.
Just, completely down and out, laying on the couch, not moving.
Watching game shows.
Atta brings him a glass for his juice, and he just keeps drinking it out of the bottle.
Yeah. When he originally comes home, she's like, "Oh, you want me to make your favorite steak and teriyaki wings?"
It's midnight.
Yes, he still wants the wings.
Wings.
He's just eating wings and just vegging out and they know something is wrong at this point, and they're trying to, understand and trying to help him, but he won't talk to them. So at this point, Rocky is just trying to get him to do anything. Look through the coupon booklet, pick out something you want to do, but it's not working. And eventually, Atta has to convince Rocky to have a talk with Dwayne.
Well, when Rocky's trying to get him to look through the coupon book and pick anything out of it, Dwayne goes, "Dad, I don't want to swim with any dolphins." And Rocky goes, "You don't know what you're saying right now." So he's still really pushing this dolphin bit.
See, this is where I'm kind of like, oh man, I wish we got the scene. Rocky takes Dwayne to swim and it turns his day around and turns everything around. And
But instead they go to the gym.
They go to the gym because, as Rocky says, it's a safe space.
And they're wearing each other's tank tops.
Again, another great line that Joseph Lee Anderson just delivers. It's just like butter, the way he delivers these lines.
He's so good.
He is so great. So they go to the gym together, and this is where Dwayne finally breaks down as Rocky's introducing him to someone else and bragging about him playing football for the University of Miami. And Dwayne admits that he's been blowing off his commitments to the team. He's been blowing off his classes. He can't shake the self-doubt, and he's very depressed. And this is where, as you said, Rocky gives Dwayne some
waffle wisdom.
hashtag waffle wisdom. We're coining it right here. But we get this great quote from Rocky to Dwayne, and he says, "I spoke my dreams out loud. That way I could try to live up to them. People can say a lot of stuff about me, son, but the one thing they can never say is that I gave up. I always kept fighting." This moment right here, in particular, seems like it shaped The Rock's entire future mindset and maybe spawned many motivational t-shirt slogans.
Now, what's interesting, though, is in The Rock's book, this is not how this went down. In the show, his parents moved to Tampa to be closer to him. But in his book, he says they were only considering doing that. They were still living back in PA. And what actually happened is he went to Toronto for his uncle's wedding. And this is where he kind of had his breakdown. Like, he hadn't been going to classes or anything like that. But the night before this wedding, his family was all at this dinner, and he starts getting into a fight with a woman. And his family is just like, what is going on? Because he had his hands around this woman's neck, allegedly. We don't know what's actually true here.
This cannot be real.
This is what he says. And then his family's like, no, we know this lady. She wasn't being rude. She wasn't being disrespectful, whatever. Dwayne, stop. And that's when they realized that there was really something up. Because even though he gets in trouble and he gets in fights, he's never acted like this before. And so that was their moment when he finally came clean about everything that had happened with football and college.
If that's not just a wild story for the book, and that's real,
yeah.
Number one, totally understand why that wasn't what we saw on the show.
Yeah.
Because, wow. Number two, what?
Yeah. Well, no, it's also, it makes more sense to have his family living in Tampa so he can just get on a bus 4 hours away and go, as opposed to traveling all the way to Toronto. It's a lot easier for a storyline. But yeah, if he was legitimately... Here's what he says. The next thing I knew, my hands were wrapped around her throat, squeezing the oxygen out of her tiny body.
Wow.
Yeah. So I hope that that's just exaggerated. I hope that didn't actually happen. I hope that the real story is what happens in the show.
I feel like this is something I want addressed one way or the other.
Yeah.
Because The Rock put this out there in a book that a lot of people could take this as, oh, well, it's exaggerated accounts, or it's kind of like, it's like the Jay Peterman book where he buys all of Kramer's stories. That was my initial thought. That was my initial perception of this book before you started reading it. But then a lot of it is lining up with the show, but then there are some things that are totally different, like this.
A lot of it matches up, but then a lot of it is really rough. And I mean, I can't imagine him why would you lie about that?
Yes, why would you, if that's true, why would you say it? But if it's not true, why would you say it?
Yeah, I mean, he's not saying that his behavior was good.
Right.
He's saying what he did was wrong. And, we know that The Rock is a guy who will admit when he's wrong and when he's done something bad. So
yeah, he keeps mentioning he did a lot of bad things. He made a lot of mistakes.
He owns up to his stuff.
Sure.
I mean, that can't be on a sitcom. You can't have a scene like this on a sitcom.
You can't own up to this mistake in the form of a family sitcom on NBC at 8 o'clock.
Right.
No, you can't.
But it's just interesting that this is one of those things that really does not match up.
This is a case where, like, the HBO version of this show would have been a lot more interesting.
This is the gritty version.
Sure, yeah.
Coming in the form of a WWE book.
Yeah, maybe in 10 years we'll get the grim dark version of Young Rock and we'll see this.
Maybe that will come after, like, The Rock has passed away and people want to, like, sully his name.
One thing that was very apparent to me at this point in the show is the parallel between Rocky Johnson's struggle with his own career and Dwayne's current struggle with his injury and maybe his career ending before it got started, and how much pain Rocky must be in just related to what happened with his wrestling career and the fact that he's driving a truck now, but he is still working the gimmick. Again, it all ties back to working the gimmick. And as we said, when working the gimmick goes wrong, it goes wrong when you're hiding your real feelings and you're not getting the help you need and you're not reaching out.
Right.
We haven't really seen that element of Rocky Johnson. We've seen the jovial coupon book Rocky Johnson, especially in this episode, post-wrestling.
Right.
Not post-wrestling, the great website and podcast network, but post-wrestling after his wrestling career, I wonder if we dig into any of that at a later point, because I'm very interested to see the parallel and how the advice that Rocky gives his son in this episode could very much apply to his own kind of mindset and how he deals.
Well, The Rock talks about this in his book, too. It doesn't happen in 1990, but it happens in 1991. His dad really struggles. At that point, he has an alcohol addiction. He starts really battling with some really serious stuff.
Yeah.
So I don't know how far we're going to get into that in this show because we're in 1990. I mean, but obviously we can blur
Sure.
the lines. But I mean, it is definitely something that Rocky dealt with. He faced some real problems.
There are a lot of aspects of Rocky Johnson that I think we have yet to see and maybe won't see fully on this show.
But you also have to wonder, maybe The Rock wants to kind of protect his dad, his legacy.
Yeah, but with how honest The Rock has been to this point, choking a woman notwithstanding about his life, it does make you wonder, will we, kind of explore that with his father? I also want to point out at this point, this blew my mind. Joseph Lee Anderson is younger than Uli.
By like a decade.
Joseph is 28 and Uli is 36. The way that Joseph Lee Anderson, at 28 years old, is able to portray a man with life experience, a father, and to not only pull it off, but to shine and be one of the best parts of this show is astounding at 28 years old. So young, so early in his career. And the fact that Uli is able to portray
someone so young,
someone younger, kind of just on the cusp. Just the fact that, I would have expected those ages to be flip-flopped. But when you look at Joseph Lee Anderson outside of the Rocky Johnson makeup and outfit and the hair and the facial hair, man, he does look young.
Yeah, but I still wouldn't have expected that huge of an age difference.
Yeah, that fact, though, the age difference just really kind of blew my mind. But at this point, The Rock says, ask for help. He talks to Kenny about struggling with depression and mental health issues and how important it is to ask for help when you need it. And we cut back to Coach O, who is not anywhere near as understanding as Rocky is about Dwayne's lack of commitment to the team and most importantly to his schoolwork, because Dwayne got a 0.7 GPA this semester.
Right.
But at this point, The Rock is, he's firing up on the comeback. Dwayne is determined. He's not going to let anyone down. The coach, the team, his family, or himself. So now on the upswing of things, we end this episode with kind of the forward momentum that Dwayne has to kind of pick up the pieces of everything that's kind of scattered around him. And does he push himself too hard? We don't know. Does he push himself too hard physically? Does he push himself too hard mentally? We don't know, but this is the spark. Rocky's words were the impetus for him to say, I'm going to turn everything around now. We had a lot of touching moments in this episode, particularly between Rocky and Dwayne. But I think the most touching of the episode was in quote unquote 2032 when Coach O, the real Coach O, surprises The Rock via satellite. He brings it via satellite during the interview with Kenny. And The Rock looked genuinely moved by this. I don't know if he knew that this was even going to happen.
It didn't seem fully planned. It seemed a little off the cuff.
Yeah.
Just when the coach comes in, he keeps saying, because it's via satellite, I can't hear him. I can't hear him. It seemed like that wasn't scripted.
Either The Rock is a really good actor, which, he's good. But I don't know if he could fake this type of scenario and the type of emotion that was just on his face and in his voice. Right. Just at the end of it, he just kind of takes a beat and is just kind of like, wow, processing that. Like, he looked genuinely moved by this. And it kind of warmed my heart to see this.
Yeah, because the coach is probably like a father figure to him. Football was such an important part of his life at this time, and his parents weren't around. So you kind of, in the first episode of Young Rock, we had Waffle playing the father figure when Rocky's not there. And I bet the coach kind of became that for him while he was at college.
Yeah. I bet this really tugged at the voters' heartstrings.
Of course.
I bet this is probably a clincher for Dwayne in this election.
Nothing more American than football.
Yeah. But you know what? Scratch that. That wasn't the most heartwarming thing in this episode. The most heartwarming thing is what we end on when Rocky Johnson gets his wish. Atta made reservations at Renee's Dolphin Palace because she is so thankful that Rocky talked to Dwayne and helped him. And I have never seen a happier human than Rocky Johnson getting to live his dream of going to swim with the dolphins.
So happy for this man.
Yeah, and he tells her, you take that camera, you bring the camera because I want to take some pictures. I love it.
If this really happened at some point, is there some picture of Rocky Johnson swimming with the dolphins?
Yes, we need to see it. And
The
again,
Rock produced the picture.
Again, we just need this scene. I don't care how you do it, when you do it. I don't care if it's a bonus scene. We just need to see this. I want to see Joseph Lee Anderson as Rocky Johnson swimming with the dolphins. And I want to see Atta having to take his picture. In keeping with the theme of this show, there were some very notable needle drops in this episode. Some of my favorites were Rhythm Is Gonna Get You by Gloria Estefan during the first football montage, Rebel Without a Pause by Public Enemy during the second football montage. Got to have multiple football montages in an episode like this. And a very interesting song that I didn't know the name of before this episode, but I recognized as the sample for the song My Name Is by Eminem, Labby Sifray, I Got the... ... And that's during the depression/food montage. But I was like, this sounds familiar. Oh, okay. I know what that is.
Now, I find the music choices really interesting, especially given the posters that we see in Dwayne's dorm room.
Yes, you had some hot takes on this.
I do. So this is 1990. This is the fall of 1990. And in Dwayne's dorm room, now I don't know if they're his posters. They're probably not his. They're probably the roommates. But there's Red Hot Chili Peppers and Nirvana posters hanging on the wall. That doesn't feel accurate. Not that like The Rock wouldn't listen to these bands, but it's 1990. And Red Hot Chili Peppers and Nirvana didn't make it big until September of 1991. And I vaguely remember in Anthony Kiedis's, he's the lead singer of the Red Hot Chili Peppers, in his book Scar Tissue, mentioning that after they started getting big, all of a sudden these jocks started coming to their shows. And they were very weirded out by that and a little disturbed because up until late 1991, early 1992, they were just kind of being followed by the weirdos, the outcasts. So I don't really think that in late 1990, the Red Hot Chili Peppers and Nirvana were making their way to football players' listening habits.
Folks, if you remember in one of the early episodes, we said we're not going to be sticklers for wrestling history details, but clearly some very strong opinions about the set dressing just in the dorm room here.
I just don't think it's believable. Look, the Red Hot Chili Peppers are one of my favorite bands.
Yeah.
I know their history.
Yeah, no, I get it. But it's one of those things where set dressing kind of plays it a little bit fast and loose. And it reminds me a little bit of things I've heard about the show The Goldbergs. I've never really watched that show, but I've heard that it's all kind of a mishmash of 80s, different things happening at different times, not necessarily in, chronologically accurate context. So I could definitely see them just grabbing some,
For sure.
what were some big early 90s bands? Yeah, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Nirvana, I could definitely see that.
I'm just trying to imagine The Rock in 1990 listening to the Red Hot Chili Peppers' 1989 album, Mother's Milk, which I just don't see him listening to.
Maybe a more accurate poster up there would have been maybe like a Metallica poster, because at that point they were becoming kind of like jock metal, because all of a sudden this underground thrash band became this big arena metal, arena rock band. So everyone was kind of jumping on the bandwagon. That would have been more of an accurate time period in terms of like what was getting really popular.
It would be another year before Los Angeles alternative and Seattle grunge would really be making its way to the mainstream. I just find it interesting.
Okay, all right.
I just find it interesting.
You want to do a music podcast by any chance? Have a lot of thoughts on that?
I do.
Anyway, final thoughts. I thought this was just a really fun episode. Very different in a lot of ways to the prior episodes, but I really enjoyed Uli
Yes.
And his performance, his portrayal of 1990 rock. I continue to adore the parents. I think that they are the glue, kind of the backbone of this show. And I'm really looking forward to the next 90s episode. I don't know about you.
Yeah, for sure. The only thing I was a little disappointed by, besides the lack of Randall, was I wish we had a little more Atta in this episode.
Yeah.
Because I feel like in the past few, when we've had her in the 80s, she has her own like central storyline. But here she's just kind of pushing Rocky to like help Dwayne out, or just being a worrying mother. She doesn't really have anything of her own in this episode.
Right. I think part of that is in an earlier episode, we had kind of an Atta and Dwayne heart-to-heart moment.
Right.
And I don't know if we really had that yet to this degree. So I'm glad that we got the Rocky and Dwayne exchanges and that kind of motivation and that, father-son talk. But yeah, Atta continues to be the glue that holds everyone together and makes all these things happen, even behind the scenes when no one knows about it. So it is very fitting, but, I do hope that in future episodes, she is more of an active part of these types of situations. And, who knows?
Right.
Because we still have her Star Search singing storyline to kind of check in on and see what's going on with that. So
also, Leah Maivia, what is going on with her? They just left it there.
That's a big cliffhanger there. So I guess join us same rock time, same rock channel to see what happens with that one. But that's going to do it for this episode of Pro Wrestling Repackaged. Thank you so much for listening. And please, if you are enjoying the show, please, let us know. Let us know what you think about Young Rock. Let us know what you think about our show. You can tweet us at PW Repackaged. Follow us on Instagram at PW Repackaged. Or if you would be so kind, if you'd like to leave us a review, you can do so on Apple Podcasts, but also Podchaser, TuneIn, any other platform that you're aware of that allows you to leave a review for a podcast. We would really appreciate it, as we are trying to spread the word about what we're doing here and also help spread the word about Young Rock. But thank you again for listening. Join us next time as we discuss Season 1, Episode 5 of Young Rock.
Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at PW Repackaged and email us at pwrepackaged@gmail.com.
Subscribe on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or your favorite podcast app. And visit pwrepackaged.crd.co for links to everything.
If you'd like to support the show, please consider leaving a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Podchaser, or any other platform that features reviews.
Pro Wrestling Repackaged is a Multitrack Minds production. Visit multitrackminds.com for projects and audio production services by yours truly.